There is going to be a difference between the intro and the beginning of the show because this is a syndicated show and I am not privy to the main broadcast. So I'm going to go ahead and play the intro.
In the shadowy corners of power and influence, where the lines between truth and deception blur, lies a world that few dare to explore. Join us as we venture into the labyrinth of the unspoken, the hidden, the deliberately obscure. We shine a light on the dogma that's been fed to the masses, unmasking the intricate web of deception spun by those who wish to control you. Welcome to Beyond Undisclosed. The truth is waiting.
All right, this part here will be edited out for the final. I'm waiting for a phone call that will bring me into a conference meeting, and I will be adding that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the timer and just wait this out. If you're interested in finding out what this is about, it's real simple. There is a new framework in which Einstein's theory and the spooky math actually work. That's correct. There is a new framework that we're working with now that will explain where this energy comes from, actual gravity, in a proper explanation. If you don't explain gravity in the proper way, you'll never solve the problem of defeating gravity. You want to build a gravity machine that supposedly is an anti-gravity device, you can't do it. Why? Because you don't have the framework and know how gravity works to begin with. So you sit there and, well, you wind up with things like airplanes and helicopters. They are not operating with a gravitational force. And that's the main reason why mainstream media, mainstream science has also been perverted, based on the fact that their foundation, the framework in which they describe these things, are that far off. So here in a few minutes, we're expecting a call. It'll be from UFO Digest, and I understand we have a couple of guests that are professors. And what's going to happen is I'm going to be put under the grill. Okay, this is some pretty tight stuff. I never expected to ever cover anything like this. I just simply realized just all at once. Okay, and then each piece fell in place after this one revelation. And there you go. So we're on standby any second now. They should be giving us a call. But nonetheless, this portion will be edited out. But I definitely do want to get an entire recording of today's show. And it's, I believe, a 2-hour show, so it's going to be extraordinary. Let's see here. Yeah, I seem to be flickering in and out just a little bit there. Personal note, I definitely have the butterflies for this one. It feels like the first time I ever had to stand up in class and read out of the book or whatever, man. This here I have a little bit of anxiety for. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm getting him more than one thing here.
Hey, Robert, your microphone's hanging out the window. Hey, John.
There we go.
Oh, you got my, okay. Just a second. I'm just trying to wrap up something real quick.
Cells upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Rick, you tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Tune in to the Family Industrial Complex podcast here on Revolution Radio, Studio B, every Wednesday, 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Get fit, empowered, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
We did not engage in conflict that was out of line with our mission.
Is it disloyalty? Is it treason to oppose the hands of tyranny? Never!
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can darn well shoot back.
I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty! Oh, give me death!
A dark cloud is finally lifting across the world as U.S. military intelligence and their global partners are destroying the deep state criminal power structure that has ruled over our planet for hundreds of years.
We are free with the God-given right, and we shall not yield that right to any power on earth.
Hi, I'm Scott McKay. The world is at, and I am your host on The Tipping Point on Revolution Radio, where every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, we bring you the latest in this ensuing takedown of this global criminal empire.
That's an image of strength.
You'll get the raw, hard truth here on The Tipping Point. So come join us Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern in Studio B at revolution.radio.
All right, thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Greetings and welcome to the Morning Star Report for this special episode in a series called Brainstorms. You'll find out why we call it Brainstorms in a little while. I'd like to welcome my guests, Dr. John Brandenburg.
Yes, there I am.
There you are.
I'm trying to get organized here.
Okay. All right, that's good. And Dr. Bruce Cornett, who's with us from Texas.
All right, Bruce.
Hey,
And, this is interesting. We have Dr. Brandenburg in Oregon, and we have Dr. Cornett in Texas. We have Alan Fredrickson in Colorado, and yours truly in New York.
Hey, we just about got this country covered, you know?
No Californians though, sadly, yet. But anyway, folks, we have a special program today. I'd like to dedicate it to the memory of the Titanic, which is actually happened 113 years ago tonight.
Wow.
And I'll talk a little bit about that toward the end of the program. The subject tonight is the ether and the fabric of time and space, matter and creation. And it's a very old idea. really old idea. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. So I thought that for those in the audience who are not familiar with the ether, I would start off the program by playing a short video by Chris Little that explains the ether. And then we're going to take up the conversation of the different concepts that each of us has regarding the ether and its nature. And Alan Fredrickson is going to present a new concept, a new idea of the role of the ether in the creation of matter, the structure of the ether, perhaps structurally fractal, and that matter, the idea that matter is created by cymatics, sound waves, aggregating and creating waves in harmony or in conflict, that they aggregate and create matter. So all of that is in the offing, but let us start with this short piece by Chris Little. He's on YouTube. I encourage you to go to his website and pick it up. But this will give all of us a starting point to begin the discussion of the ether. And we may even hear from Isaac Newton a little bit later to get his ideas of the structure, nature of ether. So with no further ado, I think, gentlemen, do you see the screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. Excellent. Right.
Yeah, I'm having trouble seeing it. Here, hold on a second. Let me
It'll come, if everyone turns off their cameras, we'll have a better throughput. We can bring the cameras back on afterwards. Same thing with the microphones. We'll get much better sound and video. So this is called Unveiling the Mysterious Powers of Ether. And they spell ether the old way, A-E-T-H-E-R.
What is ether? Ether is a unique essence of life force energy that flows through the universe and most of existence. The source of quintessence, chi, aura, and mana. It is the mystical celestial element that is also known as the fifth element. Fire, water, earth, air, and ether. In Plato's Timaeus, speaking on the topic of air, Plato mentions that they are the most translucent kind, which is called by the name of ether. One claim is that the ether is the pure essence that the mythological gods lived and breathed in the same way humans did with air. Another claim is that the ether is a force used by God himself to create the universe. Another reference would be in the Hermeticist book, the Kybalion, that not only explains its nature, but the plane it comes from. There have been many claims and theories made by alchemists, philosophers, and scientists, such as Nikola Tesla and Dayton Miller, that confirm the ether's existence. Ether is the medium for every electromagnetic wave, from radio waves to gamma rays. Ether exists in elemental, cosmic, and spiritual forces. This is also recorded in the Kybalion's entries. Energy and spirit. Everything vibrates, known as the principle of vibration. All energy moves, vibrates, and spirals. The differences between different manifestations of matter, form, energy, mind, and spirit are the result of different degrees of vibration. Levels and layers. There are three basic planes of being: the great physical plane, earth; the great mental plane, air, fire, water, and earth; the great spiritual plane, ether. Spirits are believed to be ethereal beings that are basically made of ether. Experiments on the ether. The concept of ether was used in several theories to explain several natural phenomena, such as the speed of light and gravity. In the late 19th century, physicists postulated that ether permeated all throughout space, providing a medium through which light waves could travel in a vacuum. The result of that test was that they were unsuccessful in proving that the luminous ether wind exists in the Michelson-Morley experiment. The experiment was performed in 1887 by Albert A. Michelson and Edward W. Morley at what is now Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. They suspected that the ether wind followed in one direction, but that is not the case, and so all the experiments an incorrect method of measuring ether. What I find interesting is that a great scientist by the name of Dayton Miller had positive results, and is usually left out of the conversation when it comes to proving the ether's existence. Dayton Miller was a scientific leader of the 20s and 30s. He led the leading science journal of the time. Miller provided beyond any doubt that the ether was real. He destroyed the relativists so badly and exposed their lies with such ferocity that they had to wait 14 years till after his death before they could bribe enough people to ignore his work. But there were far more experiments done afterwards that provided the existence of the ether, all of whom they willingly choose to ignore. I believe that I have really found the relationship between gravitation and electricity, assuming that the Miller experiments are based on a fundamental error. Otherwise, the whole relativity theory collapses like a house of cards. The history of science records the 1887 ether drift experiment of Albert Michelson and Edward Morley as a pivotal turning point where the energetic ether of space was discarded by mainstream physics. Thereafter, the postulate of empty space was embraced, along with related concepts which demanded constancy and light speed, such as Albert Einstein's relativity theory. The now famous Michelson-Morley experiment is widely cited in almost all the physics textbooks for its claimed null or negative results. Less known, however, is the far more significant and detailed work of Dayton Miller. Miller's 1933 paper in Reviews of Modern Physics details the positive results from over 20 years of experimental research into the question of ether drift, and remains the most definitive body of work on the subject of light beam interferometry. Dayton Miller's work on ether drift was so constructed and yielded consistently positive results. The so-called experts denied the existence of ether, and yet it's no wonder why it seems like we are coming close to a dead end when it comes to science. Perhaps it's about time that we try some new experiments with modern-day equipment. What do you think? Nikola Tesla once said that the day scientists begins to study non-physical phenomena, we will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence.
Well, there is more to it, and I encourage you to go to YouTube for Chris Little. But I think that's a pretty basic idea what we may have in mind. So, gentlemen, if you would turn on your cameras and your microphones, we can begin the conversation. First, I'd like to ask Dr. Brandenburg first about his ideas, since he is the most experienced in plasma physics, and he's been way out there to the other side of the moon, and Mars.
I'll take that as a compliment.
And he of course, and he looks like he's on Mars right now. So, John, what are your thoughts on the ether? I've always believed in it myself, and I'll give some of my ideas a little bit later. But how do you feel about the concept of the ether and the most recent experiments that seem to prove that it does exist?
Well, I've always found, ether to be an attractive concept, and when you include quantum mechanics, you have the 0-point energy, which is a field of energy, and that, according to quantum mechanics, that produces virtual particles that appear or disappear. So you can actually say that modern physics has embraced the ether theory, but they just don't want to call it that.
Right. I had the feeling years ago that was the problem. The vocabulary scared them. So I thought that maybe they came up with a new concept with the idea of the Higgs field. Do you think the Higgs field has anything to do with the ether? Because it kind of fits.
I wish I could speak with more authority on that. I was able to predict the mass of the Higgs boson before it actually was found, and presented it at a scientific meeting hosted by set up by Paul Murad.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he was such a good friend.
Oh, he was such a magnificent.
That's another thing that connects us all. Your book and Paul Murad's machine and the Morning Star.
Oh,
is
yes.
Yeah, that was how all of us came
It's so
together.
fascinating. So fascinating. They.
0 point energy, right? So that was the connecting link with Paul.
That's the connecting concept between the old ideas of ether, which there had to be sort of some substance to carry every other wave that they'd encountered involved waves in a substance, and so this was very natural. They would come up with the concept of ether, and something that was still there when you'd removed all the air, water, matter. And then, of course, when they came up with 0 point energy, then that's basically the ether. And
explain to us, if you would, what they mean. Energy is coming into this universe through a single point, or from all points, or that it's got a neutral aspect to it. Because zero is. So go ahead, John.
I'll only pontificate. I'll get off my soapbox here in just a minute and let everybody else talk, because I know everybody else has important contributions to make this conversation. But I'll just simply say that the ether has not been very well studied. In fact, the word is forbidden, and you can call it 0 point or something. You have to call it something like 0 point, and then so it is like a lot of they've wrapped it in quantum mechanics.
Yes.
They put it in the box with Schrodinger's cat, and and if you listen to Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner,
yes,
he will say, well, quantum mechanics is, kind of a hodgepodge. And he says it's not a complete theory, and yet everybody swears by it. And so we're kind of left with a kind of the best thing I can give it is it's the sound of one hand clapping in quantum mechanics, like a Zen cone, and
that's quite profound. I can understand it.
One of the heroines in my novels is asked, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And she says, "Swish, swish, swish, swish."
Yeah.
And
okay, let's turn to Dr. Bruce Cornett.
Yes, please.
He's going to give us his idea of the ether, but he's working from the Earth out. He is a PhD in geology and a master's in palynology, I understand, and quite a general scientist and a very accomplished ufologist. So, Dr. Bruce Cornett, welcome to the program. It's great to see you again. Oh, microphone. Microphone is muted.
I really haven't spent much time thinking about the ether other than in a chemistry lab. And there you have to be very careful, right?
Oh, yeah, that is
it. Parties in college, especially in the chem department.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. AKA laughing gas? No, that's not nitrous oxide.
That's not laughing gas. It was discovered the same way as the students discovered they could get very intoxicated on it.
Yeah.
And so it became a thing at parties in even the 1800s, late 1800s. So
it'll put you to sleep, that's for sure.
So Bruce, again, your perspective. I know you're an accomplished scientist and physics and astrophysics and.
Do I ever wish?
We've rambled and roamed the universe together, and so I would just like to get your idea of.
Well, I've dealt with very small things in my career. Mm-hmm. Understand pollen and spores.
Yeah.
You need a microscope to look at those, and an electron microscope. So I'm familiar with just how small things can get. There is transparent and invisible, how do you document it?
That's an
Okay.
interesting point. Perhaps Dr. Brandenburg can explain the Michelson-Morley experiment to us. You know, before we go there, we were told that it was a null result, that there was no ether. But I was listening to Richard Hoagland and James DeMeo a week or two ago on a repeat program, and they were talking about the replication of the Michelson-Morley experiment in the 1990s, and did find the ether, I would call it the ether wind, and they were citing a velocity of the ether wind 20 feet below ground level as 3.75 kilometers per second. And then they did a measurement that was above ground at perhaps 100 feet, if I recall correctly, and they found that it was speeding by, or we were speeding by it at about 8 kilometers per second. So it seems that the higher up you go, the faster the ether seems to speed by.
Yes, there's one of the things that hinders all the discussions of ether in modern physics is these experimental results have not been published, or they've actually been blocked. You know,
Yes.
We all know that academia puts a spike through things it doesn't like, and just doesn't allow them to get published. And we have to get some data out there. I will give you one example of where the ether drift apparently is now being yacked about in a intelligent manner, and that is that the Hawking radiation from the surface of a black hole involves basically if you move the ether at a uniform rate, it's supposedly not possible to detect it. But if it's moving at an accelerating rate, then it produces this radiation that can be detected. And so this is what we see at the surface of black holes are actually, in a sense, bright. They're actually radiating particles and antiparticles and electromagnetic radiation. And so that, but let me tell you, if you want your article published, you don't call that ether drift. It's the ether drift. Gosh, that the human race has always been ruled by hierarchies, including science itself. So even great movements in science require great perseverance. And Max Planck, who basically invented quantum mechanics or laid the groundwork for it, said science actually advances by funerals.
Advances by what?
Science advances by funerals, he says.
Oh, the enemies.
People who are
die away. Yes.
People who don't like an idea basically don't change their mind.
Right.
And they have to retire or pass away and allow new blood to come into the university department to allow this stuff to happen. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the nature of the human race. We're a bunch of stubborn, some people say we're the same thing that gives us perseverance also makes some of us stubborn mules. Even when confronted with overwhelming facts to the contrary, we won't change our minds.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the classical idea of the ether as Newton expressed it. So I'd like to
yes, please
tip my hat to Newton just give you an idea. It's a very different language. It's not the jargon of modern science, but I think he gets the idea across. And this has to do with absolute time and space, respectively, and as independent aspects of objective reality. So to quote Newton, absolute, true, and mathematical time of itself and from its own nature flows equally without regard to anything external, and by another name is called duration. Relative, apparent, and common time is some sensible and external, whether accurate or inequable, a measure of duration by the means of motion, which is commonly used instead of true time. Absolute space, in its own nature, without regard to anything external, remains always similar and immovable. Relative space is some movable dimension or measure of the absolute spaces, which our senses determine by its position to bodies, which is vulgarly taken for immovable space. Absolute motion is the translation of a body from one absolute space into another, and relative motion, the translation from one relative place to another. So a little bit abstruse for most people, I think, but the idea is that in his time, they thought that absolute space and absolute time were interconnected, and that this was the background for everything else that existed. But in modern times and modern science, we've gone into the quantum ocean, or the Sea of Dirac, where probabilities, there is no reality but only probabilities. Is that well expressed?
Oh, well put, Bob. Well put.
All right, so it's a good point at which to turn to Alan Fredrickson, Dr. Brandenburg, and Dr. Cornett. This is Alan Fredrickson.
How you doing?
Friend, colleague,
I'm very happy in order to be here, and thank you for tolerating my ignorance. And from that, I hope to...
So, Alan, please tell us a little bit about your background, where you learned electronics and gravitonics, and your father's education of you. That'll give a good background for how you came to have your insight.
Well, my father was electronic or radio mechanic in World War II, and I have a strong suspicion, I have had some verification, that he was involved in Operation Aphrodite, meaning that he would have been the one that would have actually built the radio control equipment used in those aircraft. After the war, he met my mother. My mother was actually part of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, and actually trained some of the actors for the Roy Rogers show, How to Fall and do trick riding on horses and stuff, and that was her career. And then, of course, they got together, and, you know, you don't drink with the opposite sex, and then I came along. And so they learned from that lesson, I guess. But nonetheless, I've been subject to tech theory, everything from sacred geometry to theories that were being batted around in World War II. Much of it in confidence from my father. And what was amazing about it, and what actually gave me this experience, was my father actually built a lab, which is comparable to John out of Canada. I can't remember his last name right offhand. But nonetheless, he was playing around with some of these Tesla effects and things like that, and having taken apart and remodeling the house, I discovered that the wood had actually gone through the nails. That I couldn't pull the nails out, and the wood had actually passed through the nail under pressure, because we were generating this type of fields in that room. And the reason why he was doing that was because he was part of the teams that put together radar as well. So they were being told what not to do rather than what to do, and they had to figure it out. And he always wondered what the hell they were meaning by what not to do. So he set up his own shop after close to retirement. He was working for West Shore Pipe, on lease to them for his retirement. So I had a lot of exposure there. I grew up building airplanes. We had amassed a small fortune building experimental aircraft and things of that nature. And I've always had a technical background. It wasn't until I went to college and I discovered how much BS college was. You see, at the age of 14, it was arranged with my teachers had gone down to the computer lab and the library. Now, nobody else under the age of 18 could get in the microfiche room for the library, and nobody under the age of, a PhD could get into the physics lab for the computer lab, which had an IBM 2000 whopping 86K memory. Okay? And
talking paper punched cards, right?
Oh God, yes, absolutely. The brand newest thing.
I actually did my first computer programming with punch cards.
Well, the first thing that was the brand new thing in the lab that nobody could possibly use was the Super B 2000 color monitor. Everything else was continuous feed paper, and there was only a couple of monitors, and that was lucky if you could get to them. Now, what would happen basically in the arrangement was if the security caught me, I was out for the day. But if I could get past the security and to one of the professors, they'd sit me down and have me type up something, and then I could play on the biggest computer, video games and stuff like that at that time. And Star Trek, the text version of Star Trek was very popular, and I played that a lot. But the thing of it is, it was during this time that I learned something. The work that I was doing was the beta for Binary Algorithm Systems Interface Control, later known as BASIC. And they renamed it. They renamed it Beginner something, making no sense out of it and removing the entire historical value of that. When I got to college, it's like, are you kidding me? And I mean, that's only 7 or 8 years, folks, So, they had completely steamrolled all over the history, and I was actually part of it. And that created animosity to the mainstream teaching. I actually dropped out shortly after that. I had a slight argument concerning imaginary numbers and coming up with some of these advanced formulas. And I says, it's not possible. Because the only thing you can do is establish a ratio, and at ratio we don't have any actual value of what that difference is to begin with. The only thing we have is a ratio. Okay, how much horsepower to what compared to what are we making here? There is no actual conclusion. It's completely arbitrary to what the number you choose for the arbitrary number, and then you can't run the formula backwards to prove it. Oh, well, we prove it this way with your... No, that's imaginary stuff. It doesn't exist. You can't show it to me because it doesn't exist. You can't, we cannot match and recreate the same formula. So that can't be true science. And when I hit that with the math teacher, it was over for me. And it wasn't but a couple of years later that I had a vision of discharge, where I think it was shortly after one of the observatories was put online, Hubble. I think it was right after the Hubble came online, and it dawned on me, where is matter? Okay, it's always discharging to where? To some place that doesn't have a high as discharge or charge rate as it does, so it discharges to that point. But if energy cannot be destroyed, then there's only so much energy trying to discharge into non-existence, and guess what? There's no place to go. It just simply can have an imbalance of charge. As soon as these charges actually balance, we're in trouble. There's no coming back. It destroys creation itself. So with that in thought, I came up with an idea called unified difference. Whereas everything is moving from a charged state to discharge, but unfortunately it can never do that because there's always a lesser charged state after that and a higher charged state than the first. So it's constantly working in a circle. That would explain the vortex.
You mean fluctuating, Alan? Don't you mean fluctuating rather than working in a circle?
No, it actually forms a circle because there's no way for it nor to equal a full discharge. It actually develops a cycle, okay, which we recognize in the two cups connected at the base of the cup with the large S handles on it. Now, I think you gentlemen may have seen magnetic descriptions like that because they represent magnetic flow in 2 dimensions in a 3-dimensional form, much like a grid chart. So when you see those, all of a sudden something realized. You have a flow going from one place to another, whether it be the macro or the giant. So with those 2 thoughts, I was rather lost. I just simply knew I had found something. And it dawned on me that the energy still has to come somewhere.
Let me ask you this, Alan. The energy is discharging and fluctuating. Is it discharging only in our dimension, or is it discharging into an interdimensional realm?
All of these dimensions are created simultaneously in the structure of the cymatic. Okay.
So is this kind of shell-like?
What's a cymatic?
Cymatic is the patterns that you get when you hit certain tones. As a matter of fact, you can see it directly above my head right here. Okay, that's a cymatic tone.
Is cymatics
Now,
waveforms that are for different tones. And so Dr. Hans Jenny used to vibrate a plate with different tones, and he put spores on top of it, and with each change of tone there would be a different change in geometry. So the idea is that sound is giving us shape, basically. So who wants to go next, Dr. Brandenburg? Or
Alan, I want you to say, it sounds like you discovered in your education that the situation in academia is complex, partly real and partly imaginary.
Well, yeah, no, I hit it head on because I don't accept imaginary. If I can't make a mental model of it, it's not going to happen for me. It may be a form of mental retardation. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I can actually tell you how to make a physical analog of an imaginary number. It's a twist, believe it or not. You can start out with, you're aware of matrices, the rotate vectors.
Okay.
You can have what's called an identity matrix that just maps a vector onto itself. But then you can have another vector that actually twists the vector at 90 degrees. And that, as it turns out, the mathematics of that, check it, and these are just 2x2 matrices, becomes an imaginary number.
Well, I'll tell you what, imagine pi. This is another oxymoron I bumped into, is pi.
Alan, is part of your theory about imaginary numbers. I want to say that one of the great fallacies in mathematics is the number line. The number line assumes something that is not true, and it has to do with the value between 0 and 1 is a quantum leap. Nothing.
It is.
Right,
yes.
It's a quantum leap. But 2 units of something in our 3-dimensional reality and 3 units of something, you can make a discrete calculation and a measurement between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and come up with 1 unit separates each of them. But when you go to 0 and 1, that's not equal in value to the space-time between 1 and 2. Because 1 and 2
is that?
finite. 1 and 2 is finite, but 0 and 1 is infinite.
Oh, right. You're subtracting something that is not finite from something that is finite.
That's right. Okay.
Now,
So
would we like to get rid of some of the spooky mathematics? We can get rid of it by using this framework. The idea that I've come up with is not altering the observations we have already had. You guys are very rehearsed with the math. I'm not. Because, I hit the stopping point. I couldn't say, okay, we'll just blow over this. But the framework in which we are placing that needs to be basically flipped upside down, and it's been used. Inversion has been used for a long time in order to hide things. Well, I found it. It was simple as that. Instead of a bottom up, trying to describe these physics from the bottom up, starting with the atom and the forces that we cannot even describe, we started at the top. And we realized that if at the top there's an energy field that is in absolute saturation with more energy pouring into that field. This creates a cymatic, not just in the frequencies and singular frequencies that we're seeing here, but when you combine all of these frequencies together, it creates a fractal. Now, as these energies rise, the energy no longer can maintain its current form. It has to manifest. So as these energies rise, it creates matter. Simple as that. It creates a photon. Now, this is the biggest part that actually ties this whole thesis together, is solving the anomaly of the twin slot experiment. It's very simple. That particle is only existing approximately 10% of its existence that you're observing it. So in one form of observation, you're actually seeing the photon. In another form of observation, you're only seeing the wave. It's because you're only seeing the bottom trough and the center of the wave. You're not seeing the root mean square anymore. So as this photon is being created, it is actually a standing wave, and from its source, it is creating a photon in a wave that is only visible at the root mean square, and it continues. That wave is a standing wave, so any warp in that wave will occur at the same peak, at the same location of the same peak. So that also explains now why gravitation can be detected instantly across the universe without any calculation for time, because what? It resonates at the root mean square of the standing wave, altering all the wave at the same time. When this wave is offset, when this wave is slightly offset, it creates the image and our perception of time. Go ahead.
Digest this and ask Dr. Brandenburg or Dr. Cornett.
People tell me, physicists say time does not exist, and I said, well, the rent is due.
Well, again, this here eliminates the spooky math out of it. We're not looking at spooky math anymore. When we're talking about antimatter, there's a good, what was it, 4 or 5 magnitude more energy than what we calculate when we decide that antimatter and matter come together. I mean, this is an outrageous amount, and we can't explain it. It's real simple. What happens to that energy when it converts back from a solid of opposite frequency? It cancels itself out. Both particles, okay, over a circumference, meaning to the power of 4 to the power of 8, okay, is discharging simultaneously both values, not a single value, not the point of contact over time, but they have canceled each other out in that single positive wave that canceled each other out, and it's instantaneous. So that's the reason why we're getting 8 magnitude higher measurements from these reactions than what we did. Another example of this, we're saying for the somatic part of it, the Voyager all of a sudden slowed down. What from? There's nothing there. And then mysteriously sped up. Wait a minute, we didn't tell it to speed up. Well, it's real easy. It passed through a node of this cymatic energy, and it was slowed down from our perception because it was in a high energy area. And then it left that high energy area, showing a node in the cymatic.
And you pointed out something very important, Alan, that a lot of stuff they see, they don't understand. They try to come up with like string theory, to explain with very abstract math.
Well, gravity is caused by mass collecting that energy, and that energy is again creating a node. The planet Earth is stuck in a rotation caused by a node in rotating cymatics. And that rotation is covered by the vortex of the sun itself. It's going to be faster closer to the sun and slower further away.
It's certainly an interesting, model. And I tend to agree with you, by the way, that having physical models that you can visualize and see on a tabletop is much superior to having some kind of abstract math that
John, I think that that's a conceit of science today, that they're all trying to mystify each other.
I've seen that. I've seen that.
More arcane and intricate formulas, and it's actually very simple. E equals mc squared, but that changed over time. At one time, it was E over mc squared equals 1. Right? We do a little algebra. These are my equations.
Well, there's some little bit of fancy math involved in that.
Yes, exactly. It's simple algebra.
It's not the same. It's not really the same equation,
Right, because you know how I came to this idea. I looked at E equals mc squared basically as a photograph of the relationships of matter in our present epoch in space-time. But because the universe was expanding, and I believe in the Big Bang, that it was contracted, I said to myself, that would have been different. The more condensed the universe was, the earlier, closer to the beginning of time we get, that equation would not be constant going back in time. And so I did some basic algebra, E equals mc squared. So I divide both sides by mc squared, and then I get E over mc squared equals 1. And that was the singularity. So I think that Einstein had to have known this. I mean, I'm doing the most simple algebraic functions on the equation. And what I believe is he was hiding the fact that his equation proves the, I call it the existence of God. And if I go one step farther, that the universe came out of nothing.
It came out of sound.
Yeah, well, the O, listen to this. E over mc squared equals 1. And then if you subtract 1 from each side, you have E over mc squared minus 1 equals 0. And I think that 0 represents what was before, that it was kind of a cosmic egg. It was nothing.
The great Om.
Exactly. So that's just the start of it.
I did explain out for my math students, though. I explained that the 0 came from the idea of an empty sheep pen.
Is that so?
Yes, if you look in your sheep pen and you don't see anything there, they make sheep pens in circles, because if you put corners in them, the sheep will actually get jammed up in the corners and trample each other. So you have to make this thing round.
As I understood, the 0 came to us by studying Aztec numbers.
Well, the Mayans had
Mayans are the
Mayans had 0, yeah. And so it was also invented in India.
Yes,
and that became it spread into the Arab world, and then from there into the West, and so the 0 became a great discovery.
Yeah, well, it brings us back to this idea of the 0-point energy. And when I look at that symbol, the O or the 0,
yes,
I feel that it's a reflection in geometry, not mathematics, but geometric form, that's reflecting the portal through which the universe came into existence.
Oh, it's a very, it's basically a representation of a sphere, which we know is one of the most powerful forms in nature, and everything
undifferentiated, not yet any yin and yang. And I tell people, when you see a yin and yang, try to see it coming out of the surface, because people think of it as a flat two-dimensional figure. But in reality, there are three forces there. There's the yin, the yang, and the wu-wang, which is the background. You would not be able to see the yin-yang if you didn't have it on that white piece of paper. So for all intents and purposes, that white piece of paper that's allowing the yin and yang to be seen, we could conceive of that as the ether.
Interesting.
Symbolically. So
Yes.
let's see. Alan, you want to have a few more words about this?
Oh, absolutely. And as you apply this framework,
we have about 5 minutes left. That's why
Okay.
we're watching the clock.
Okay, I want to add something too once Alan is done.
Oh, okay.
well, one of the things I wanted to address is something that has been recently observed and accepted, and that's entanglement. Okay, two particles seem to be linked across a vast distance instantly, is what we're talking about gravity, the same effect as gravity. The only way that this is going to be happening is if it's actually happening at the root mean square of a standing wave. And that standing wave is caused and is traveling through a saturation or an ocean of energy. And the fact that we're so close to a sun creating even more energy, we have the solid matter, we have the existence, and we have the finer pieces of the fractal being actually created, being human. So if you want to sit there and say the God particle, okay, we can actually say that the cymatics is under some design in order to stay balanced, in order to allow this energy in order to convert into this shape. And that would prove God. But I guess, for this little g, we're going to have to go talk to the 300-pound guy in the corner, bench pressing 2 cops in one hand and the Volkswagen Bug in the other, and ask him if he wants to be referred to as God. So, I mean, that's little g. Okay, but everything else, the fact is so far out of our reach, so far out of our concept, but our minds are all divided and created and frameworked around the somatic. That's the reason why we have reports of being psychic in order to be able to look into time and the future and the past, is because we're not necessarily bound by that. We're actually a creation of that. And as soon as we realize we can jump from one trough in the wave to the next trough in the wave, we actually have time travel and a lot of these things solved. The only problem of it is, in time, things travel in distance as well. So by the time you go back 10 minutes in time, well, the Earth just left you at 47,000, miles per hour. For 10 minutes, it's gone, man.
30 kilometers a second is how I remember. It's a nice round number. But I wanted to point out your idea of foreknowledge being connected with the ether. And we are, of course, not celebrating, but, recognizing this is the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. And the Titanic disaster was pictured in a novel 14 years before it happened.
Right.
The novel was called Futility. Not a very good name to become a bestseller, but he described the ship in detail, and it was full of rich people on its maiden voyage, ran into an iceberg and sank with great loss of life. And he imagined that, and when I saw that, I decided I have to write science fiction because I want to tap into that vibe.
Yeah.
That you suddenly, but yeah, to me that's one of the an outstanding example of foreknowledge.
Yeah, like remote viewing. Remote 14 years ahead.
I'll give one last proof of this before I don't know if it's a break or otherwise. The cosmic microwave background is way too high and too smooth. It's too uniform. Okay?
Oh, I know.
Now, here's the answer to that. What we're not saying is something else came before it. We're not saying that the actual pressure wave of a standing wave came before that, and that standing wave occupied X amount of space instantly. This explains the instantational form, but until this actually formed, we would not have matter of the universe inside of it. So it was the expansion of the standing wave that was instantaneous without actual creation yet, and creation formed within inside of it. That's what I'd like to point out.
Well, I agree with you, because what my theory is that before anything existed, with the first manifestation of light, pre-light universe was in a state of protospace. And I define protospace as space that has not yet been traversed by space or time. And this standing wave that you talk about, I would call that the wave of the creation. And that creation created a new space. And inside that new space, multidimensionality was possible, because protospace is a one-dimensional state. It's a one-dimensional space and one moment in time. It's eternal, never ending, never changing. But when that standing wave manifested and created this visible universe of ours, that's what created a new space, or new spaces burgeoning in a fractal way, as you might say. And then the sound of the creation reverberating is creating the cymatics that you described as being responsible for the creation of matter. So let's see, we have 1 minute left, so I'd like to ask the audience to stand by. I'm sure we've got you way out there in outer space, or inner space, I hope.
I'm on Mars. That's actually not in outer space. It's and unfortunately, I will have to be leaving after this.
Thank you, John. Thank you for being.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be invited on your show and talk to you, Alan, and of course, always Bruce and Bob. So,
thank you very much.
That's my name, huh?
Thank you very much.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
Mountain High Time, 2 hours of an organization to the madness, discussing the ever-changing dynamics of being both physically and mentally prepared for a plethora of possible outcomes to our future and present. A look into the latest technologies, new scientific discoveries, and how they might be used in connection to the human domain and controlling it, ancient cultures and places. Be warned, this is an opinionated look through headlines, guests that are not afraid to question the narrative, a little bit of crazy ramblings of a stoner conspiracy factus that pushes constitutional concepts. The place and the time are the same, another dimension we call Mountain High Time. Saturdays 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Mountain High Time, right here on Revolution.radio, where information never sleeps and truth breaks the spell.
Are you a fan of rock and roll? Does it get your feet tapping and your hands clapping? Then be sure to check out Crip Rick's Rock and Roll Hour right here at RevolutionRadio.com, where we get down and talk all things rock.
If you're sick of the lies and ready to know thyself, to love thyself, well then tune in to the Loveolution with your hosts, Amy and John Paul, where we speak all about truth, love, and freedom every Tuesday night, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Studio A, right here on Revolution Radio. And remember, only you can free your mind control. Be a Loveolutionary.
The original machine had a base plate of pre-fannulated amulite, surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing, in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panametric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal lotus-o-deltoid type, placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible tremie pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, taking the confusion out of transmutated lunar girdle springs for 4 years and running. Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported alternative media radio on the planet. I want to thank everybody for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the one place where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Show them what we got.
All right, thanks for listening. While we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Greetings and welcome back to the Morningstar Report with a special episode called Brainstorm. In the first hour, we were brainstorming about the nature of creation, actually, specifically discussing the concept of the ether from which all things arise, in which all things are embedded, and which is carrying everything. If you believe Aristotle and Socrates and long list of luminaries. And that's actually one of the names originally I was reading earlier today again about the ether and the different concepts of ether. And one of those was called the luminiferous ether. And that was conceived as the medium through which light propagated, an ultralucent medium, let's call it. And so then that held for a while. Then they thought that they disproved the existence of the ether, so they went into the concept of empty space. So in the first part of the program, I played about 4 minutes of a really fine documentary. You can mute your mics if you would, Alan. Would you mute your mic until we get the conversation going? But I played about 4 minutes of this really excellent little documentary on the ether, unveiling the mysteries of the ether by Chris Little. So I'd like to start this part of the program with the continuation of the next 4 minutes of that. And then we're going to spend about 40 minutes of this program on this subject. And then we are going to commemorate the passage of the Titanic into history. So this is unveiling the mysterious powers of ether with an A-E, aether. I like to pronounce both letters, aether. And so this is the courtesy of Chris Little.
Only the existence of a field of force can account for the motions of the bodies as observed, and its assumption dispenses with space curvature. All literature on this subject is futile and destined to oblivion. So are all the attempts to explain the workings of the universe without recognizing the existence of the ether and the indispensable function it plays in the phenomena. My second discovery was of a physical truth of the greatest importance, as I have searched the entire scientific records in more than a half dozen languages for a long time without finding the least anticipation. I consider myself the original discoverer of this truth, which can be expressed by the statement, there is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment. Nikola Tesla. In the 20th century, Nikola Tesla discovered many inventions through his research, which involved ether energy. With around 300 patents to his name and many breakthrough inventions, Nikola Tesla is one of the greatest scientists that ever lived, if not the greatest. Tesla was probably onto some major breakthroughs and discoveries using the ether element. His main goal was to create free energy for the whole world. This great work has been concealed by greedy people for centuries, and because of greed by the money-hungry monopoly elite investors and the owners of the power companies, he got shut down. When Tesla died, the FBI banned and seized all of his work, especially his work that involved the use of ether energy. Donald Trump's uncle, John G. Trump, a professor at MIT and a well-known electrical engineer serving as a technical aide to the National Defense Research Committee, was called in to analyze the Tesla items, which were being held in custody. Tesla's research on ether energy has been declared as secret records by the United States government. Truth has a way of surfacing, and there will be a day when all the world will see all of Nikola Tesla's great inventions come to life. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality.
There you have it, the wisdom of Nikola Tesla. I remember the first time I heard Nikola Tesla's name in 1960. My uncle, who happened to be Yugoslavian, like my father, who was Yugoslavian, my uncle said, "Who invented the light bulb?" And I said, "Thomas Edison." He said, "No, Nikola Tesla." And he said, "Who invented electricity?" And I said, "Thomas Edison." He said, "No, it was Nikola Tesla. AC energy was invented by Nikola Tesla. DC energy was known, I guess, since ancient times. But DC energy, electricity, is extremely dangerous, can only travel short distances before it burns out the wiring. The farther out you want to send it, the more current you have to have, and that just fries the wiring. So Nikola Tesla was walking in Yugoslavia one night, and a bat came bopping along, let's say, and started fluttering over his head. And he saw from the wing beats, he saw the beats of the bat's wings. And from that, he got this idea of an armature that created AC electricity, alternating current electricity. And that's why America surpassed the entire world in electromagnetic science, because AC electricity was easier to handle, easier to harness for great works. So, Dr. Bruce Cornett, you care to give us some of your thoughts on electromagnetism or geomagnetism? Your mic is muted.
I know it's muted. I had to get over there.
Okay.
Arrow that I have to move on my screen.
Yeah.
And well, one of the things that I put into the chat was a question that needs to be explained. Why is there a state called negative refraction, and why does it produce reverse Doppler?
Negative side of the wave. We're sitting at a 0 to a positive side or a negative side, depending on your point of view or where you set 0. But we're sitting at the root mean square of the wave, at the tip of the wave. Now, you're going to have existence at the negative portion of that wave, or the opposite flow of that wave. Okay, so if we're in a standing wave, that is going to be duplicated at the top of the wave and the bottom of the wave both.
Now, Alan, in that analogy, the baseline is the material universe, the top of the wave, and the anti-material universe, the bottom of the wave?
Well, from our point of view, it would be considered positive, and the opposite would be considered negative, yes. But if we ask the question, I think that the question he was asking is gravity incontemplatively weaker than an EM force, and why, is what he's actually asking. Because that would be resolved in that matter. Electromagnetic forces are high frequency localized ether compressions, meaning that compression is creating the standing wave, just like we see in these standing wave tanks. It just simply flops from one positive to the other positive, the trough being filled. It's still a walking wave. Now, you can walk that wave forward, you can walk that wave back. Now, the discharge...
Let me ask you, using this idea of the standing wave, how do you view lightning? And where does lightning come from? Where is it going? If it's a wave and we're seeing it...
It's a property, it's a side property of the wave. That's literally what I was describing earlier, is that there is a continuous charging and discharging, which was my next point. Let me find my notes here on this. The thing of it is, we are in a constant state of discharge. We're discharging by distribution. It gets distributed over a large area, and that is determined by the frequency and the speed of ether itself. Now, there is a constant overcharging, but we're still discharging under that condition to somewhere else. That's what creates your positive and negative vortex, is that charge and that flow of charge. So as the charge leaves us, it ages us. That is the actual passage of time, is the passage of the discharge, not the charging. Because the charging can only happen so much and so fast before it has to do something else. We have so much energy here that we have the basic, the fractal that is created at 30 degrees and 33 degrees. These sacred numbers are created in some of the first fractals. One of them is a lightning, and the other is a tree that is subject to the same fractal because of its growth and its magnetic properties. So it is going to be forming itself in that fractal. We can see it very fast in the form of lightning. We can see it very slowly in the building of a tree. And it's the same fractal.
I'm going to ask him a question. If that's correct, then on another planet other than Earth, will the fractal process work the same way?
Depends on the energy.
Yeah.
There's only so much information that we can have. This is one of the first things that dawned on me, was the fact that we are sitting on channel 4 on a TV set. There's channel 5 above us, there's channel 3 below us, there's channel 2 below us. There's even channel 1. There might be some UHF channels out there, but it is separated the same way. And then after reading some religious things and learning what metallurgy is, the true metallurgy, not taking lead and turning it into gold, but taking gold and turning it into something extremely more powerful, and that's monatomic gold. You take a pile of monatomic gold, you set it on a table, you open a skylight, sunlight hits it, it makes a flash of light, it's gone. You close the sunroof, and guess what? It's back. You open the sunroof, pass a pencil through it, and close the sunroof, you won't see the path of the pencil. It goes somewhere. In the Mormon belief, they say that there's golden tablets that go somewhere. UFO lore says that gold is so valuable in order to do something. And it is not lead being turned into gold. It's gold being turned into something called white gold, which is the older reference for it. And this white gold was being made in the time of Egypt. Some people that ingest it ingest now monatomic silvers, which is basically, if you take a look at any of our precious metals, what is making them precious? Well, it's the monatomics in them. Nothing else has that precious state. So it's the monatomic metals that we pride so heavily, and that is actually one of the sources where this goes, because it can travel past the light barrier. The light is not the speed of light that's a barrier, it is a barrier. It literally is the top frequency of our bandwidth. The lower frequency, believe it or not, I figured out too, it's the existence of fire. There's only two things in the entire universe that actually burn, and it has to have two elements, oxygen and hydrogen. The only thing that burns on the planet, it happens to be biological, made out of what? Well, 80% water and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it will burn. But you can't burn a rock. You can melt a rock. Okay, so this is where the esoteric actually comes in. The frequency below us is actually bleeding into our dimension and creating the reaction that we are looking at as fire from a lower fractal. It's a lower fractal. It's a lower primary fractal, and that fractal originates in the dimension below us. The higher the dimension, we have more delicate and finer fractals in the dimension above us, making that description biblically and scientifically correct. They're supposed to have something like 26 different colors up there, where we only have a limited, what, 8? Or actually 3 primary. So they have a higher...
up there, Alan, what do you mean 26 colors up there as opposed to...
I seen some math years ago, it was back in the 80s, that they were speculating the existence and the dimensions and the observation of the next realm. And they did not use the cymatic pattern as a demonstration, but they showed that these there would be more information, so you would expect not to have just 3 primary colors, you might have 8 primary colors. And it was a very interesting...
That's interesting, because many years ago I published a physical theory by an Iranian scientist, a PhD, who contacted me when I was editing UFO Digest. And the guy's theory made a lot of sense, and they spoke of these higher dimensions in this Iranian theory in terms of colors.
Well, again, there's an absolute barrier to that, because there's a destructive frequency between us and them, and the monatomic gold is to be able to pass that border and be able to travel into that next frequency, which would explain a lot of the behavior we see with UFOs as well. And we already described them as phasing out of our realm, but they're still visible. They're going out of phase with it. Well, they're not in sync with the main standing wave anymore, but they're in line enough. We get things like Battle of Los Angeles, where we have a UFO. We sit there and dump tons of munition on this thing as it moves up the coast, and guess what? Not one of them touched it. Why? It wasn't sitting directly in our root mean square. We can actually see it. It's there, but it is not in our time. It's slightly dissipated. It's a step behind us, riding the upward part of the root mean square, right at the border of the root mean square. It doesn't have enough existence in our time at the top and the complete root mean square. It's over on the side. So if it only exists to the side, when we fire a bullet at it, it passes right through. Why? It isn't at the center of the root mean square.
But listen to this. Last year, a woman coming into New York on a flight to LaGuardia was taking a video outside, out the window, and she captured, I think it's the most important UFO video of all time, because as I studied it for weeks, I discovered that several frames in her video where the UFO is there's a double image. The UFO is disappearing where you saw it in the last frame and appearing where you're going to see it in the next frame. It's
I
remarkable.
remember you
So-
mentioning that, and I have an answer for that using the same framework. What they're
Well, I
doing
think-
is, again,
yeah.
they're moving along from the center of the root mean square, and they're going to a sideband frequency. They're still within the
People that when you say root mean square, you're talking about the top of the wave.
correct. Okay, or
Okay.
1/3 the top of the wave. Okay, so the
1/3.
difference is the difference between writing with a pencil and writing with a magic marker. Okay, unless you actually have the beginning and the end of existence, just like the split light experiment, you're not gonna, you may see them, you may have some idea that they're there, but they're not physically where you are because they're offset from that root mean square. They're slightly down off of one angle, or they've compressed themselves in order to be away from the center being the most effective. Okay, that's where existence is most effective. That's where the bullet hits you. So if you're actually to the left of that root mean square of the main wave, you're no longer touchable. In addition to that, as long as you can move to the can't you now, as the next wave comes into place and this one drops down, okay, and the stairwell is actually happening between these two, can't you catch that at the zero median and catch that next wave and go up?
How about jumping from one wave to the other without
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, that these things pump, and when they're equal to your height on the wave, you can jump from one wave to the other. Now, that's the same way we have time being actually propagated. Okay, but now you're actually traveling within time in your own time space to the next bubble. So, I mean, the actual visualization of this is very easy if you look. Maybe I can find a standing wave and bring it up.
Okay.
Well, I would bring in something to your discussion.
Go ahead, Bruce. Would you say that again?
I'd like to introduce something, since you're talking about this jumping from one wave crest to the other. One thing that has happened to me multiple times is when I've been confronted with a small grays who have abducted me. And one thing that they like to do is they take a wand, it looks like a metal rod, and they touch it to my body, usually to my forehead. And at that point, I completely become anti-gravity. In other words, I float, and they can pass me through windows and walls, and I won't even feel it happening. I can see it happening.
Yes.
That has happened on multiple occasions. And on one time when they brought me back, everybody in the room was frozen in place. This was a room filled full of band members who were waiting for their turn in the changing closets after a practice. And some of them were suspended in mid-stride.
That's because you were moving so fast. You were moving.
No, you weren't moving at all. You weren't moving at all. You were moving across the top of the wave. If you can see this picture I'm showing right now, let me bring it in better form here in just a second.
Oh,
there you can see this.
That's the way I visualized. That's the way I visualized the ether as a
Well,
pulse.
again,
Like that.
well, it's not so much a pulse. This is actually a standing wave where they alternate from trough to top. And right at the center,
but
you
I'm
notice
looking-
it's
I'm not
almost
looking
pure
at the
flat.
water.
Do you notice that in the middle, that there's a motion that actually everything becomes flat? At that point, you can sit there and jump between those two ridges. Now, this is actually the existence of the photon. You're measuring in one wave, you're measuring it, and the other wave, you're not. So when you observe it one way, you're not observing it long enough to see it. And that's the reason why.
What I was looking at, again, it's interesting how two people can look at the same thing and observe different aspects of it. Alan was looking at the water as the waves, and I was looking at the oscillations in the light reflecting off the water.
Exactly.
So when I was saying that reminds me of my concept of ether is that light band that you see going laterally, pulsing toward the end of the pool and then bouncing back in. That's the way I see ether, but the ethereal field that I envision is a vortex. It is spinning incredibly rapidly, and yet as it's spinning, there are waves traversing it. So,
well, here's the thing. This is something I want to point out. You notice how these appear to be walking, or a slow escalator and stairs? It seems to be appearing to move. That is the movement of time. And it's slightly offset. That's what actually gives us our time. Now, from our point of view, we'll never be able to see whether or not that wave is moving as slowly as or faster or anything else. But that is the actual pulse that gives us our time. Our existence is actually a strobe effect, and that's where this so-called holographic universe is coming from, which almost got it right. It just can't sit there and align it with actual observations. So when you sit there and look at this,
thing about this video you're showing, which are waves passing across a pool, is that people look at these things and they think that the molecules of water are moving horizontally, that they're traveling down the pool.
No, they're traveling forward and back.
Absolutely in the same place. They're oscillating, and the wave motion, the wave energy, is actually animating them
I see what you're
to
saying.
move them in a vertical direction only, not lateral or horizontal version. Bruce, do you have a comment?
Oh, just thank you for this interesting explanation. But the question I would have is it possible, is what happened to me, were they able to change the oscillation of vibration energy within my matter?
Of course, the only thing they had to do is have contact with you, and you resonate in their, whatever they're generating, you'll resonate with them. Especially if you're already in tune. You're already biologically in tune with them. So the moment that they touch you, if they have a device on them that would alter or bring you forward in this motion, then it would bring you with them, because you would begin to oscillate, because the oscillation would be artificial. And it would be stronger than your natural oscillation to begin with. So it would overcome you immediately. It would fill and resonate in your body because it's tuned to your body. Absolutely.
As I passed through a window and wall, there was no interaction between the molecules and atoms in my body and the atoms in the wall.
Exactly. There was none. There's more space in the wall than there is in outer space.
I wanted to say that I've had that experience myself, Bruce. I wasn't touched in the head, but I was touched in the heart. And it's very interesting. I had remote viewing experience back in the early 80s, and I was walking around this vehicle that I had built. It was a beautiful red car, like a Corvette, and it was mine. I got in it, and I was zapping through a time tunnel. I mean, I was going at faster than light speed through this time tunnel. When I came out, this little guy there, we might call him a gray, but it was actually Albert Einstein standing there, and he had a silver rod in his hand, and he motioned to me, come on over here, like this, drawing me forward with a hand gesture. So I went over to him, and then he pulled out the silver rod, he put it on his heart, and then he put it on my heart, and then he took a breath and he went, huh! And this pulse went through the rod into my heart. And I think that's where these inspiration for the equations that I shared with you earlier, the algebra that I did on the equation, proving the existence of God, proving that the nature of God is a trinity, energy, matter, and light. And again, as I say, that these three elements, this trinity, emerged out of a cosmic egg. It came out of nothing, of this vision that I'm sharing with you.
One of the things I wanted to point out was this other video right here, and I can't pronounce this, but it's Masao Emoto, and he did water experiments where students had the same water and went to freeze these different crystals, and they all come out different. And he did some more experiments and found out that human emotion leaves an impression on water, which is completely unexplainable in any other framework. In this framework, you have a discharge of the somatic pattern that you are. And that somatic pattern, your brain can alter and change. And this water is just like film. It can record from your bleed over, from your discharge into the water. It will record that somatic pattern. Now we have a reasonable explanation for this effect. Without this framework, these anomalies are unanswerable. Okay, you can't answer them. So,
go ahead, Bruce. I was going to say, we also have an explanation of the efficacy of both curses and blessings. The water reacts when, and same as plants, when people pray over plants, the plants burgeon, they grow, but when people curse a plant, the plant will wither. So this, I believe, is a direct effect on the water constituents of living things. So voicing curses in particular affects not only the object, but the generator of the bad vibe or the curse. By the same token, a blessing or a benevolent thought directed at an object, the object receives it, healing energy. The person who's generating that is healing themselves even as they are healing the other.
Again, we're organic.
Yes.
It's simple. We are made of water. Water is what is recording this. We are generating and using that as a median, the same way as electricity uses copper as a median in order to transmit and leave the impression of these somatic passings. As we move through time, we leave a history of that somatic pattern being there. I was talking about history. Go ahead. You cut out quite a bit. Try again.
I have 4 squares on my screen.
Oh, we lost somebody.
Well, Bruce, the 4 squares are actually Alan is generating imagery, and he's sharing screen, so you're seeing what he's seeing on his monitor.
Right, but I'm also seeing an image of you and of the Studio B.
Yeah, those are the...
we lost somebody is what he's saying.
No, I turned off my camera.
No, we lost...
So when I turn off my camera, you guys get bigger. So you were showing your demonstration of waves on your monitor. I wanted people to be able to see that.
Now you're very big, Robert.
Yes, thank you. Well, so anyway, I chose this picture in the background, by the way, as a perfect expression of what we're talking about. We're seeing the surface of the moon with the sun rising, cracking the horizon, illuminating what I believe is a permanent cloud of moon dust that is floating above the moon. And in the background, we see the Earth shining through that haze. And so all of that is contained in a substrate, which is what we're talking about as the ether, the thing that's holding everything. The cosmic glue is what I would call it. And you know, I've talked about my mystical experiences regularly, because I think that's what we're here for. You know, we're not just here to become blocks of wood. We're here to experience the interdimensionality of life and existence. So I've had the privilege of having mystical experiences, and one of them, I was taken back to the beginning of time, and I was a drop in the ocean of consciousness. So this ocean of the consciousness is what came first, and the consciousness gave birth to light. First, self-illumination. Right? Consciousness itself is a light. It shines out. And then our senses pick up the reflections of the light that we are casting. Think about that. Right? It's not really just the sunlight bouncing off things that makes them invisible to us. It's our own light that's interfering with the sunlight.
Let me give you guys an observation.
Okay, go ahead.
The cymatic patterns I'm showing here, I'm going to show you one that you're
Okay,
going to recognize from Egypt.
Bruce, you and I turn off our cameras so we can see the imagery that Alan is sharing in the full screen.
You're going to recognize this from Egypt. And let me blow it up here and put it on the main.
Okay. As soon as Bruce turns off his camera, we'll be able to see the whole thing in it. There we go. That's the cymatic pattern.
Now this cymatic pattern, if you look in the Egyptian lore and all the hieroglyphs, you're going to find a 7 or 8 priests, very small, presenting something to a Nephilim king. The Nephilim king has a awning over him, a little man standing on the audience, on top of that, and then there's 2 lines going down to what appears to be a table, and above the table there is a circle that has this pattern in it. This is cymatic.
It's interesting
Now,
to find that. It would be very interesting to see that relief.
well,
saying
this
on the
relief
mountain,
is also found in the Mayan temples. A lot of these, but there was.
It really looks insectoid to me. It looks like eggs or larvae.
Well, it looks like the rising sun to me in some aspects, but that's exactly what the Egyptian hieroglyph looks like. And my point is that they have known about these cymatics for a very, very long time. And for whatever reason, this one has importance. Now, the cymatics that you find down in Mexico, a lot of them have been destroyed. And that destruction was complete, except they left a few of the cymatics there that they didn't believe was, of importance. The cymatics, very few of these pictorials in the Egypt are intact. Even on the one that I found, this here is the reason why I found it is because it's the primary one that they're showing directly over the table, the same way that you would show a card table in profile, but above it you would show what's on the table in an icon above it. So they were showing what was actually on the table, and it was this. And the little man above on the awning above the king has 2 strings going down that he is playing like a violin or a flute in order to create this. Okay, so this here is very important. This is how they actually moved all that weight. This is how they sit there and change the course of this and change the course of this. Is how they made electricity. This is everything right here. Okay, and once you realize the fact that they have systematically destroyed, there's little circles all over the place in these things, and the center of the circles have been destroyed, meaning that these have been removed from history. Now, if you want to find them again, you can just simply look at the floors of the Vatican. If you look at the floors of the Vatican and the tiles in the Vatican, it has all of these otherwise hidden, and it's been displaced from Egypt to the floor in the Vatican. I yield.
Okay, that's a good time to yield, because at this very moment we're going to take a course correction in the program. I'm going to bring my camera back, and I'm going to say, folks, at this moment, this very moment, 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, this day in 1912, the Titanic hit an iceberg and scraped alongside it. And we're going to take the last portion of this program to remember that event, how historic it is. It remains. We're on the 14th, as I said, 20 minutes to midnight, and it sank on the 15th. And the 15th is also known for another significant thing, which is Income Tax Day. And later on in the program, I'm going to show you how the sinking of the Titanic and the income tax are 2 sides of the same coin. But right now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask my friends to turn off their cameras, and I'm going to read for you an account. We always hear about the Titanic, and but tonight we're going to hear more about the iceberg that sunk it. So I'm going to start this oration by reading you more about the iceberg and the collision than about the Titanic and its dimensions. We'll start with this. It remains uncertain whether officers saw the Marconigram. That was what a telegram was called in those days, a Marconigram. Ismay, who was the director of the White Star Line, which owned the Titanic, he saw it. The incident with the Baltic Marconigram, which was a warning of icebergs in the area, fueled suspicion that Ismay had exerted undue influence on the captain to keep the Titanic from slowing down despite ice warnings, because they wanted to break the record for crossing the Atlantic. Thus, in the inquiries after the disaster, people wondered why Captain Smith showed Ismay the Marconigram in the first place, or why Ismay claimed that he and Smith did not say a word when the Marconigram was handed to them. Ismay portrayed himself as a simple passenger who had only traveled on the Titanic out of curiosity. But Ismay, the owner of the White Star Line, actually died in disgrace because he dressed up as a woman to get on the boat, one of the lifeboats, to
it was right in our time.
Yeah. In the evening, around 1830, the Californian observed 3 large icebergs 5 miles south of her. She reported this, giving her own position. The Titanic did not learn of this at first, as the device was switched off. It was not until 1937, that's the time, which would be about 8:37, that the Titanic received 7:37, that the Titanic received this message, which was addressed to the Antillean. Bright confirmed the message and passed it on to the bridge. At 21:40, a message came from the Msaba. It defined an area between points 42 north and 49 west, and 41:15 north and 50:18 west. In this imaginary rectangular area, it saw much heavy pack ice and great number of large icebergs, also field ice. This is confirmation that the Titanic received the message, but no indication that the message reached Captain Smith. Marconi operator Jack Phillips on the Titanic was very busy with the Titanic wireless set having broken down. He had spent the whole night repairing it and now had a window of only 2 hours in which to reach Cape Race. Phillips wanted to quickly transmit private messages from passengers, which had built up from the previous day. Because other ice warnings had already been received, the message from the Mesaba may no longer have seemed so important to him as to be absolutely necessary to pass on to the bridge. Cyril Evans, the California radio operator, was the last to radio a message to Titanic at 22:55. As requested by Captain Stanley Lord, Evans worked to inform the Titanic that the Californian was surrounded by ice and had stopped for the night. However, the message lacked the abbreviation MSG, and Evans addressed his colleague informally as Old Man Phillips. Phillips introduced the contact in the straight diction of radio operators, and he Morse coded back, "Keep out of it, shut up, I'm working Cape Race." In Morse code, that was a DDD, meaning stop transmitting. He continued to relay messages to Cape Race. Evans on the Californian kept listening for a while and then went to bed. In summary, the Titanic knew no system for collection and evaluation of ice warnings or other messages related to navigation. The radio operators, who were not employees of the shipping line contracted by Marconi Company, were not familiar with navigation and could not assess the significance of a message in terms of content. What was important for them was whether a message was clearly addressed to the captain, and then one of the radio operators sought out the captain. Otherwise, they might send a messenger to the bridge. There was obviously and probably no procedure for relaying messages like the one from the America to the hydrographic office. As such, no one in the ship's command saw all the ice warnings. Of the surviving officers, none later remembered the warnings of the Noordam, the America, the Baltic, the California, or the Mesaba. Captain Smith, for example, only knew the messages from the Caronia, the Noordam, and the Baltic. However, they were aware of ice in the region, at the very least. Iceberg visibility. On the night of the disaster, Captain Smith assumed that an iceberg would be discovered in time so that it could still be avoided. The decisive factor for him was that the night in question was clear and cloudless. It was generally believed at the time that on a clear, albeit dark night, one could see an iceberg within 1 to 3 nautical miles. According to surviving second officer Charles Lightoller, he and Smith believed an iceberg was visible at 3 to 4 nautical miles. Smith had said that at the slightest sign of a haze, the ship should proceed very slowly. The lookouts were instructed to pay particular attention to ice. In 1926, Fred Zeuster, in 1925, Fred Zuller, of the United States Coast Guard, was in charge of the International Ice Patrol. According to his research, a medium-sized iceberg could be seen a nautical mile away on a moonless, dark, but clear night. On the night of the Titanic disaster in 1912, Halpern says, the sea was calm and smooth. Therefore, an iceberg could not be seen from the break of the waves. The only light that could have come down from an iceberg would have been reflected starlight. Visibility would have been even worse in a low-hanging haze, purported to be extant on the night of the ship sinking. But survivors' testimonies contradict each other as to whether there was any. Other ships reported no haze whatsoever. Possible explanations could be that the witnesses understood different things by the word haze, and that instead of haze, the ice field was actually seen towards which the Titanic was heading, and because of which the Californian had already stopped. The sighting and the collision. On Sunday, 14 April, at 23:40 board time, the Titanic collided with an iceberg. Some survivors saw the iceberg with their own eyes. Others perceived the dark shadow. There are also statements about pieces of ice that fell from the iceberg onto the ship. Furthermore, there are statements about how contact with the iceberg was heard or felt. After the two men in the Titanic's crow's nest sighted the iceberg, one of them, Frederick Fleet, sounded the bell 3 times to signal that he had seen an object straight ahead of the ship. However, the iceberg may have been seen on the bridge promptly or even simultaneously. According to Fleet's colleague, Reginald Lee, the iceberg was only half a nautical mile away, about 900 meters, when it was sighted. According to the British inquiry after the accident, the iceberg was 1,500 feet away, about a quarter of a nautical mile or 457 meters at the time of the sighting. For a ship moving at 22.5 knots, 41.7 kilometers per hour, the iceberg would accordingly have been sighted 40 seconds before the impact. Nevertheless, she scraped against the iceberg, which lasted several seconds. As it turned out later, the iceberg caused several leaks on the forward starboard side of the process. Because of the Titanic's high speed, which could not be stopped so quickly, part of the iceberg pressed against the hull below the waterline. This pressure caused rivets to come loose, and the outer skin to develop narrow, elongated leaks. 2 hours and 40 minutes after the impact, the ship sank. Writer Walter Lord questions whether the iceberg itself may not have been damaged. During the impact, underwater, on the forward side of the ship, ice could have already been scraped off the iceberg to such an extent that the iceberg no longer caused any leak on all the starboard side. Fitch, Layden, and Wormsted, on the other hand, follow the thesis that the ship was not damaged aft for a different reason. Initially, the helmsman was indeed ordered to turn to the left, but shortly afterwards, he was told to let the ship turn to the right. This maneuver, ordered by the first officer, William M. Murdoch, probably prevented the Titanic from shearing off with its stern and touching the iceberg again. Witnesses' statements on the iceberg itself. The accident happened 20 minutes before midnight, when hardly anyone was on the decks, explaining why relatively few people saw the iceberg with their own eyes. Witnesses included, above all, the lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, who both survived. Lee was the first of the two to be interviewed by the British Inquiry. According to him, the iceberg was a dark mass coming through a haze. As the iceberg passed, he saw a white fringe at the top and only there. Viewed from astern, one side appeared to be white and the other black. It was higher than the foredeck, which was 55 feet, 17 meters above the waterline. The Attorney General suspected that by this time the ship had shed some light on the iceberg. Lee concurred. Fleet could not remember who saw the iceberg first. He saw a black object high above the water, slightly higher than the foredeck. Unlike Lee, Fleet did not remember any haze. Other surviving crew members had their own accounts of the iceberg. Quartermaster Alfred Oliver came onto the open bridge from port and saw the tip of the iceberg rushing past the ship. According to Oliver, the iceberg was about as high as the boat deck, or a little higher. He only saw the tip of the iceberg, so he could not estimate its width. Unexpectedly, the iceberg was not white, but kind of dark blue. Quartermaster George Rose stood under the docking bridge at the stern and hurried towards the starboard after feeling the vibration. He saw the tall iceberg slide by less than 10 feet from the ship. He feared the berg would strike the edge of the docking bridge. The iceberg was about 100 feet high. Soon after the collision, Captain Smith and several officers had rushed to the bridge. Smith, Murdoch, and Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall went to the starboard side of the bridge to look for the berg. Boxhall, the only survivor among them, was unsure if he still recognized the shape of the berg because his eyes were still adjusting to the darkness. Passengers either noticed the berg as a dark shadow or a white mass that passed by the ship, or sighted the iceberg later from the deck. Edith Rosenbaum looked out from her first-class cabin shortly after the shaking onto the enclosed promenade deck. She saw a ghostly wall of white pass by. George Rames and Frederick Jane Hoyt observed something similar. Rosenbaum then went on deck, where there were only 5 passengers, including William T. Stead. They saw the pieces of the ice on the deck and learned from Francis Millet. Iceberg. We all turned with renewed interest to the great floating mountain of white. It had drifted some distance to starboard and rose indistinctly and mysteriously in the velvet darkness. Emma Bucknell and her maid, Albina Bazzani, saw the iceberg pass by the window of their cabin on D-deck. Because of this and the ice corridors, she dismissed the rumor heard on board that the iceberg was underwater. Another woman had said it was higher than deck D, which seemed plausible to Bucknell. Eleanor Casimir was alarmed by the commotion and went to the promenade deck A. With Harry Anderson, She went forward to the bow. Probably from the railing of the promenade deck, she saw small pieces of ice lying about. From here, they saw the berg was rising 75 to 100 feet out of the water. They met the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, there, whose cabin was nearby. It can be surmised that if they saw the iceberg, Andrews likely did as well. Albert and Vera Dick had been woken by the shock and went out onto the deck. Vera remembered seeing the iceberg. William Sloper and stewards had rushed onto the deck and were still able to get a quick look at the iceberg. Finally, witness statements on the collision and the ice on the ship. A number of passengers later described the experience of the collision as a slight shock or jar. The sound was described by Carrie Chafes, for example, as if someone was pulling a chain against the side of the ship. Charlotte Collier experienced the collision as a long backward jerk, followed by a shorter forward one. Others were not awakened by the impact, or only by the engine stopping soon afterwards. Like 12-year-old Ruth Becker, some went back to sleep. Others were extremely concerned. And in closing, I remember this prayer that was cited by President Kennedy at the time of the loss of the Thresher. And it said, "Oh, my Lord, thy sea is so big and my boat is so small." Hey, the people, souls of the Titanic, rest in peace. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Okay, gentlemen, we are off the air.
Awesome show, man.
Thank you for a great show, memorable one. And